Go to your quarters.
He was going to hurt me.
Go to your quarters or I'll pick you up and carry you there.
Bridge to all decks, it is time for a brand new episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mance.
And I'm Steve Morris, and I am really excited to visit what I've always found to be a very difficult episode, but I now have so much to say about it. So I'm really excited to be working on this one with you, Scott.
This is a really interesting episode to talk about. It's not an episode that I've gone back to revisit many times, but when I do go back to revisit it, as I did for our latest episode of Enterprise Incidents, there's a plug for you. So the episode is Charlie X, which is a landmark episode for quite a few reasons. The biggest reason of all is that it's a damn good episode, still effective, one that still holds up after 55 years. It is an episode that I have always enjoyed, and it is an episode for many reasons that has freaked me out many times over. Steve, like when you go back to your early days as a young Trekkie, how did you view Charlie X? Like, what were your initial thoughts about Charlie X in the younger years of your life, and how have those thoughts changed over these last decades?
Well, I think when I was a kid, this is one of the episodes I found genuinely upsetting. Another one we're going to be doing soon, which is Miri, is another episode I found genuinely upsetting. These episodes where there are uncomfortable and difficult situations, and it's also an episode that it doesn't end in a nice way. It ends in a very unsettling way. But I'll tell you what's really weird is it's the difference between watching it as a kid and watching it now as a father. There is so much in this episode, and I'm going to talk about it as we go, but like I can see my son Jackson in Charlie X. Some of him, he's 9 years old, and some of the trying to teach him how to behave, trying to teach him to deal with big emotions and all these things he's going through, particularly during the pandemic. And it's like, I just kept imagining as I'm watching this, what if I gave my son godlike powers? Like, what would he do? And it would be probably pretty scary, So I had a very visceral reaction to watching it this time.
Well, this episode did resonate with me as an early Star Trek fan, because when I was watching Star Trek throughout the 70s, I wanted to be liked. I mean, who doesn't want to be liked?
Yeah.
A lot of people want to be liked. But when I was going to elementary school and middle school and high school, I wanted to be liked. And, well, of course, I still do. But as a science fiction fan, as a Star Trek fan, as a very vocal and overt Star Trek fan, being a fan of science fiction like that when you're young is not cool. And it was not something that you would instantly have people like you because you said, hey, I'm a big time Star Trek fan. I mean, now it's different. Now it's like you say, I love the Marvel movies. I love Star Wars. I love Star Trek. Now everyone thinks you're cool. But it's an episode that has resonated with me for many reasons over these years. It is an episode that has always stayed very, very strong, has really held up, and it really goes through so many different tones and emotions and covers so much ground. And you know what, Steve? It's kind of like the episode The Naked Time, in the extent that when we see Charlie and he's starting to, we see that he's definitely unusual and he's different. He's displaying these powers. First we don't really think that much of it, but just like The Naked Time, it snowballs, it gets worse. And it gets to the point where the Enterprise becomes like a hell ship, where it's like, oh my God, we got to get off the Enterprise. But before we get into our deep dive, there's a few things we have to mention about the stats of Charlie X. Okay, so first of all, this episode wasn't the first Star Trek episode to air. It was actually the second episode to air on September 15th, 1966. Now, originally NBC wanted this episode to air later in the season, around November, because of the mention in this episode of Thanksgiving, the holiday Thanksgiving.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
But what happened was, while they were shooting all these other episodes in production order, there were certain episodes that needed a lot of special effects. And those special effects took time So when the first episode actually aired on September 8th, the only episode outside of Where No Man Has Gone Before that they already had ready to go was Charlie X. So that's why Charlie X was the second episode to air on September 15th. The writer of this episode, DC Fontana, real name Dorothy Fontana. So it first started as an idea from Gene Roddenberry, and then Fontana did her first teleplay, and then Roddenberry did a polish. So Dorothy Fontana's impact on Star Trek, so huge. I mean, Steve, Dorothy Fontana is up there with Roddenberry, with Gene Kuhn, with Bob Justman, as probably one of the four most important people in Star Trek. No one had a bigger impact on Star Trek outside of those other three guys than Dorothy Fontana. So she was born on March 25th, 1939. She passed away a little less than a year and a half ago on December 2nd, 2019. She was Gene Roddenberry's secretary, and she was 27 years old. And she used the name DC because back in the mid to late 60s, it wasn't common for women to be staff writers. So she just wanted to hide the fact that she was a woman, thinking that it might be a problem for whatever reason. But Charlie X wound up being her first Star Trek screenplay. And over the next 3 years, Dorothy Fontana came to write some of the very best episodes of the series. Episodes like This Side of Paradise, Journey to Babel, The Enterprise Incident, also Tomorrow's Yesterday. And in the first season, after the departure of Stephen Karabatsis, she was promoted to story editor. And she was the youngest story editor in Hollywood at that time. And she was also one of the few female staff writers. And she stayed in this capacity until the end of the second season, even though, you know, she wanted to be a freelance writer so she could do other screenplays for other shows, but she still did write some episodes for the third season. But it still didn't end. Her involvement with Star Trek continued because she was an associate producer and a story editor on the animated series. She wrote the very best episode of the animated series, which was Yesteryear.
That's the Spock one, right?
That's the Spock where he goes back through the Guardian. I mean, that was a great episode. That would have been a great live action episode.
Totally.
And then she returned for Star Trek The Next Generation because she wrote the two-part episode, the pilot of Next Gen, Encounter at Farpoint. She wrote Dax for Deep Space Nine. Wow. And she also wrote episodes for The $6 Million Man, The Streets of San Francisco, Logan's Run, The Waltons, and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which I think is really cool. I love that show.
What is it you think she brought to the show? Like, what would you say her contribution is?
Oh, one word: Spock. Her development into the background of Spock, starting with This Side of Paradise when he, gets infected by the spores and he has all those emotions, but especially with the second season episode, Journey to Babel. I mean, she wrote Spock's parents, Sarek and Amanda. I mean, that is a great episode for the development of Spock, for the development of his Vulcan heritage and his Vulcan background. And with This Side of Paradise, I mean, that's a very sensitive episode. And she brought so much heart and soul, I think, to Star Trek. I mean, what do you think?
No, I think that's the biggest thing. And I also think, I don't know that a guy could have written Charlie X because of how well Yeoman Rand is handled, and because this is a more emotion-oriented show. I mean, not that guys can't write emotions, of course they can, but it's not the adventurous, Where No Man Has Gone Before. It's not, the big science fiction-y Corbomite. It's a very personal story, which again, it's just one of the things that I know we talked about before. It shows the flexibility of Star Trek, of
Absolutely
the ability to do the big and do the small, to do scary, to do emotional, to do comedy, to do all these things. And Charlie X is certainly a departure. I also think about, so I just tuned into this new show. I watched this weird episode with this salt-sucking creature who can change shapes. And now I'm watching this weird episode with this super-powered kid, and I wonder what I'm thinking Star Trek is at that point, because those are not, they're atypical shows in a lot of ways, you know? And so it's like, I haven't had Corbomite or No Man Has Gone Before or Naked Time, which, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, what is this show about?
Yeah. This is the second episode to air, and it actually was filmed between July 11th and July 19th, 1966, over the course of 6.5 shooting days. So in the first season, the per episode budget for Star Trek was $193,500. So the cost for Charlie X came in at $177,941, which makes it under budget by a whopping $15,559, because Charlie X is one of 6 episodes of the original series, and it was the first episode to be filmed entirely aboard the Enterprise. Because like Naked Time was on the Enterprise, but you had the teaser,
right,
which was shot on Side 2000. So the entire episode takes place just on the Enterprise, and some of the other episodes that also took place just on the Enterprise were The Changeling, Journey to Babel, A Land of Troyes, Is There in Truth No Beauty, and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Now, Fred Steiner composed the score for Charlie X. So this was his third of 12 original scores that he composed for Trek episodes. And Charlie X was actually, he had said, his favorite of his 12 recorded scores. This one recorded, okay, so this is interesting. So the score for Charlie X was recorded on August 29th, 1966. Think about that date, Steve. What does August 29th, 1966 mean to you?
I'm guessing it's a Beatles thing, and maybe is it the last performance?
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Did I get it?
You got it! Steve, you absolutely got it! And that was a guess based on your reaction there. But yes, so, oh my God, I'm very, very impressed with you, Steve. If we weren't doing this virtually, I would give you such a freaking high five.
And is it Candlestick?
Yes. So August 29th, 1966 was the Beatles' last ever paid concert. You know, that doesn't include the rooftop for Get Back and Let It Be. So the last ever paid concert, Beatles concert, San Francisco, Candlestick Park, August 29th, 1966. The last song they played when they bowed was Long Tall Sally, and that was it for the touring years of the Beatles. And on that day, Fred Steiner composed the score for Charlie X.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
That's very cool.
So the interesting thing too about Charlie X is, I'm wondering now, did you ever see the Twilight Zone episode?
No, I looked it up. It's the one with Billy Mumy. Billy
Mumy, right. It's called It's a Good Life.
Right.
And it's a third season episode. So it aired in 1961. And Billy Mumy, who everyone knows, of course, as Will Robinson from Lost in Space a few years later. So he plays this kid who has God-like powers. He can just wish anything to happen, and he can wish people away that he does not like, or people that he thinks don't like him. And he does that. And everyone around him is scared to death of this little kid. And even though it's never been officially discussed, it must have been an inspiration for Charlie X, don't you think?
That's what I think. It's funny, on the Cinephiles, when we lose interesting actors or filmmakers, we usually do a little tribute to them. And so Cloris Leachman passed away about a month ago, and I had totally forgotten that she's the mom in that episode.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So listen, I mean, Charlie X, it must have been inspired by It's a Good Life. And It's a Good Life was actually remade as one of the segments in the Twilight Zone movie, which came out in 1983. And that segment was directed by Joe Dante. That's one of the two best segments of that movie. The other one being Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, or the remake of that episode. But I think Charlie X is a fantastic episode, much, much better than the episode that preceded it, The Man Trap. An amazing guest performance from Robert Walker Jr., amazing performances from not only William Shatner, but also Grace Lee Whitney is terrific. And it's an episode that holds up. Like you said, Steve, I mean, it's got tension and suspense. It's got humor, heartbreak, tragedy, and it's pretty scary at times. And it also is the first episode to air that had a theme that would run common throughout Star Trek, not just the original series, but all of the shows. And that is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. The other thing about Charlie X, Steve, is that when Gene Roddenberry wrote his series proposal on Star Trek, the one pager that he wrote dated March 11th, 1964, it had descriptions of some of the episodes that he had planned. And there was one description, just one paragraph, one sentence actually, called "The Day Charlie Became God." And his description of that is, and I quote, "the accidental occurrence of infinite power to do all things in the hand of a very finite man." So Roddenberry's story outline was dated April 23rd, 1964, in which the title was changed to "Charlie is God." His updated story outline, which was dated April 14th, 1966, because now that he's got his cast in place, that's when he started calling it Charlie X. Fontana wrote her first outline on April 27th, her second draft teleplay on June 27th, and Gene Roddenberry's final polish, final draft teleplay dated July 5th, 1966. So let's get into it, my friend.
It's so interesting that he had that idea so early. And now I'm even more excited to enter the world of Charlie X. You ready to go?
Let's do it.
So we start in the transporter room. We hear we're beaming over a passenger. We got two adults, one kid. As you mentioned, this is Robert Walker, who is the son of Robert Walker, who was in Strangers in a Train. It's probably his biggest, most famous appearance. And it's a very peculiar scene.
Captain Raymond. I'm Captain Kirk. This is my navigator, Tom Nellis. How do you do, Mr. Nellis? And this is our young castaway, Charlie. Charlie Evans, his dossier.
So the Antares is it's a smaller vessel, only has 20 people, 20 crewmen aboard. And there was supposed to be a scene at the very beginning during this teaser where we see the Enterprise pull up next to the Antares, kind of like the way we see it pull up next to the Botany Bay in Space Seed. But because they had to get this episode out early, they didn't have time to do special effects and build the model for the Antares, so that was dropped. So we never see the Antares. But when they beam aboard, you could just tell that these two guys, Captain Raymart and Tom Nellis, that they're really nervous. Like they're scared. They are scared of Charlie.
Charlie seems nervous and awkward, and they're not talking all that much. And then there's this moment. We hear a music sting. Charlie's eyes roll up in the head, and suddenly the guys are saying all sorts of great things about Charlie.
Wonderful boy, Charlie. We felt quite honored being the one
having him aboard with us. Why, it's been a great pleasure.
Okay, this is exactly the kind of scene that makes me think that this was very much inspired by that Twilight Zone episode, because they are going out of their way to say nice things because they don't want to upset him. And because, as we will see later in the show, we know what happens when you upset Charlie.
Well, and I think he's actually forcing them to say nice things at a certain point. When they're quiet for too long, I think he's using his powers to make them say nice things.
The key observation about this scene, Steve, is that all this time, Kirk has his back to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't see what Raymart and Nellis see. And when there's a bit of a freeze on these two guys and they look very nervous and they're looking at Charlie like he's scared. And then we see Charlie and he's making this face where his eyes are kind of rolled back. And I'll tell you, even by today's standards, it's scary. Like why is he making that face? And like, is this the version of Charlie that has been commanding the Antares all this time? Which is why those two guys do not want to stick around. They cannot wait to get back on that transporter platform, beam back to the Antares, and get the hell out of there.
And one of the things and this is, I think you mentioned in a previous episode how good Star Trek is at teasers. And this is one we're like a minute in, and already we're going, something's up with this kid. Something's dangerous about him. I don't quite understand it. And the scene continues. And one of the things that keeps happening is Charlie keeps interrupting. He doesn't quite understand the social cues and norms of how you're supposed to behave. And you see Kirk noticing it. And it's something that I think I mentioned earlier, is that one of the great skills of Captain Kirk is his observation, is you can see him seeing that something is up. And there's this moment as Charlie continues to interrupt.
You keep interrupting, Mr. Evans. That's considered wrong.
You're right. Kirk calls Charlie out. And Charlie, I guess it's safe to say, he has no social skills, okay?
Right.
I mean, you just sort of like chalk it up to the fact that he was left alone and he had to fend for himself and survive. But then, well, someone else walks into the transporter room. And I guess they don't have any women aboard the Antares now, do they?
And that person is Yeoman Rand, who comes in. And Charlie, of course, 17-year-old boy that he is, who's never seen a woman, has a serious reaction.
Are you a girl? Is that a girl?
That's a girl.
And the way Shatner plays it, by the way, he's like really, kind of charming. He's like, thinks it's kind of funny. He's like, yep, that's a girl.
It's Act One. Charlie's getting examined in sick bay. And this is where we hear that he's been alone on this planet since he's 3 years old. And somehow, how did he grow up to be a healthy adolescent? And McCoy comments on the fact that the ship's food supplies couldn't have lasted 15 years.
After that, I found other things to eat.
And you learn to talk by just listening to the ship's tapes?
Which, again, these are things that we're going to find out are actually not true. And then Charlie asks about Captain Kirk.
Well, he isn't like Captain Ramart.
Oh, no. Captain Kirk is one of a kind, Charlie.
He's just got on board the Enterprise, and he's already worried about people liking him. He says to Dr. McCoy, "Do you like me?" And McCoy says, "Oh, sure, why not?"
The other ship, they didn't like me. I tried. I'm trying to make people like me. I want them to like me.
Most 17-year-olds do.
It's a nice moment for Charlie to really be on a starship, not a starship with 20 people, but a starship with 428 people, a lot of them women. And, the interesting thing is that when this episode was in development, there was concern that everything took place on the Enterprise. Now, the program manager at NBC who approved all of the scripts before they went into production, his name is Stan Robertson. So every time there was a new draft or a new version of a story or a new version of a screenplay, Stan Robertson would weigh in, he'd give his notes, and his concern was always that he wanted the action to take place not on the Enterprise. It became like a point of contention for him whenever he would read a screenplay and it would start off, "Oh, we're on board the Enterprise." So he suggested that we move the action with Charlie off the Enterprise. Like, let's really get into the strange new worlds aspect of Star Trek. Now, it was Gene Roddenberry who insisted that the action stay on the Enterprise for one reason, to make Kirk more involved, and the other to really present a danger to the Enterprise and its crew, to really increase the stakes of Charlie's out of control powers. And that was a very, very good move on Roddenberry's part to insist that the action stay on the Enterprise, because it's just like, just like the Naked Time, like the ship is losing, sort of spiraling out of control, in this case, because Charlie is in control, then that's going to put Kirk in much bigger dire straits because his ship is in danger.
Such a great choice. Because it creates this monster in the house feeling, like our space, the Enterprise, is not safe because this kid is running around in it. That's part of what adds to the pressure of the scene. The moment that Charlie says, I wanted them, the other ship, they didn't like me, I wanted them to like me. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations like this with my son, because there's an upset at school or somebody does a thing. And what's so interesting is, like, there's all this stuff that we know as adults about human interaction that actually doesn't come easy. It takes some time. And my son in particular, I think, has struggled with seeing all the little clues of behavior, all the ways that language works. And so he won't see it all, and he won't see maybe his action that made someone else angry, or he won't see the clues that things are getting worse, or he'll be unintentionally rude because he doesn't know how to do it. And watching him it's been a process. It's not like he goes, oh, I get it. It's that, no, we slowly but surely trying to teach it. And I think about this kid who had no human interaction. It makes perfect sense that he doesn't know how to do any of this stuff. One of the things I'll say just really briefly, when they first started to come up with AI, and they're like, and this is in the 60s, this is right around this happening, where we're going to make a computer that can talk, is they suddenly realized it was about 1 million times harder than they thought it was. And they had to bring linguists in because language doesn't work like how we think. Everything is about facial cues and situations and words. It's not like a word means a thing. It means a certain thing in this context and a different thing in that context. And so the variables, when they were trying to teach a computer, is 1 million times bigger than we thought it is, because we all do it all naturally. We don't think about it. Charlie is like that computer with nothing in his memory banks. Like he's having to figure it out step by step, and it's way, way beyond him.
Also, in addition to figuring everything out, he's going to have to figure everything out most likely by experience and observation. And one of the first things that he observes on the Enterprise is an interaction between two male crew members where they're talking about hanging out when they're off duty. And one guy says, hey, you got a deal, friend? And he slaps the other guy in the butt as he's walking away. No harm, no big deal. It's like pat someone on the back, no big deal. But Charlie remembers that for his encounter when he runs into his crush, which is now already very obvious that he is a major crush on Yeoman Rand. And, who can blame him? I certainly had a crush on Grace Lee Whitney when I was growing up. And
Sure.
She was, I just loved her as Yeoman Rand. And he, out of the blue, gives her this perfume.
It's my favorite. Where did you get it? They don't have any in the ship stores.
It's a present.
So she's like, I got to go. I'm on duty. And she's walking away, and he slaps her in the butt, just like he saw these other crew members.
Charlie?
And he's mortified. He feels so bad, and he's speechless. He's at a loss for words. Like, you really feel for this guy. He just didn't know. He didn't know. He didn't know.
Look, why don't you tell Captain Kirk or Dr. McCoy what you did, and they'll explain it to you, okay?
Boy, he's 17 years old. He's an adolescent, and his hormones are raging.
Two things about this scene. The first is, one of the things that's clearer to me now than I think it was when I was a kid, is one of the things we're dancing around with is adults' inability to talk about sex with kids. There's so much that's like, well, you talk to him. Well, no, you talk to him. And in this moment, Grace Lee Whitney is like, no, you have to go talk to a man to explain this stuff. The other thing, I said something when we did Enemy Within, where I said I thought that was Grace Lee Whitney's best performance. I was wrong. This is her best performance.
I agree.
She is fantastic in this episode because she's walking this line of not liking this kid's behavior and not liking the situation, but also trying so hard not to hurt him. And you could see her balancing that out and see how it evolves over time until we get to the scene later in her quarters.
Charlie's very existence proves, in fact, there must be some intelligent form of life on Thasus. He could not possibly have survived alone. The ship's food concentrates would have been exhausted in a year or so.
By which time he would have been eating fruits, vegetables,
Probes
and
of faces indicate very little
and
edible
probes
plant
have been known to be wrong.
Doctor,
Mr.
are you
Spock.
speaking scientifically or emotionally?
It's a typical Spock McCoy encounter where they're disagreeing, they're playfully arguing a little, and this is one of the great moments that people came to love about the series, to see how Kirk and Spock, how Spock and McCoy, they're always at odds, whether it's something serious or not so serious, but they are bringing different perspectives to the table, which is one of the things that makes the relationship so great.
Gentlemen, the fact is the boy is here, and he's alive, and he needs our help.
And he needs a guide, and he needs a father image, Jim.
I'll depend on your astute abilities to supply him with that.
It's totally running away from the sex talk with the kid. You know what I mean? He's like, no, I don't want you do that, doctor. You can tell him all the medical stuff. And now we cut to the rec room. This scene was definitely cut down in the version I watched as a kid. Spock is playing on his Vulcan lute. Is this the first appearance?
The first, okay, yes. This episode marks another first, in the sense that it's the first appearance of the Vulcan harp, and it is the first appearance of Uhura singing, because she did that in another episode a few down the line. And I love seeing the interaction in the lower decks when they're off duty, when they got their guard down, and Leonard Nimoy is playing the harp, and he's got a little bit of a smile. And Uhura starts singing, and she's singing about Spock.
Oh, on the Starship Enterprise, there's someone who's in Satan's guise, whose devil ears and devil eyes could rip your heart from you.
It's a real light-hearted moment.
So I think the singing goes on too long in this scene. And I think it clearly seems to me an example of, we have this singer, we should use her. I also think the first half of the song about Spock, where she's clearly improvising these lines, it is weird. It's a weird moment that's happening. And Spock is kind of smiling and enjoying it on some level, and then maybe not. And there's a lot of kind of going on between them. And I wonder, there's that strange moment in Mantrap where Uhura is flirting with Spock and saying, oh, are there moons on your planet? And don't you ever talk about wanting to talk to a pretty girl, blah, blah. And it doesn't go anywhere. And now we have this other scene where she's kind of mocking his appearance and singing to him. And I go like, oh, was this a thing that they thought they were going to build, like the Rand Kirk thing that ends up not happening? Were they thinking about building this with Uhura?
And Charlie walks in the room, and he wants to play cards with Rand, and she's like, being friendly to him, but just says, oh, pay attention, you have someone singing right here. So he sits down, a little annoyed that she's given him the slight brush off for a moment. So she finishes the song, and everyone's having a really, really nice moment. Rand says, hey, one more time. And the look that Uhura gives to Charlie, like, oh, I know what I'm going to sing about now. So now she sings the same tune, changes the words to playfully make fun of Charlie.
Oh, Charlie's our new darling, our darling, our darling. Charlie's our new darling. We know not what he'll do.
Problem is that Rand knows this is not a good idea, and she's kind of giving Uhura the look like, don't go there. And Charlie doesn't like it either.
Of course, all Charlie wants to do is to talk to Yeoman Rand, as he wants to show her a magic trick. And the thing that's getting in the way is this person singing. And so eyes roll back up in his head, and suddenly Uhura can't sing anymore.
The look that Charlie gives Uhura isn't the eyes rolling back in his head. He just gives her like a look, and she loses her voice and she can't sing. So, okay, well, song's over. Now I have the attention of the woman who I want to have the attention of. So he starts showing her a card trick, and he turns over the cards, and they're photographs of Rand.
Well, how did you do that?
Well, I can do a lot of card tricks.
Even if I was really super impressed with a magician, I'd be like, that's impossible. That should have been kind of a red flag, but she kind of went with that. And then he shows her another trick where he tosses a card away, and then it shows up in her uniform, right in her breast area. Definitely a really, really good trick that could only be done by somebody with some kind of a power. And we haven't even seen the full extent of it yet, but we know that it is a power that is formidable.
Two things about this. The first is that what Charlie doesn't know, but I do know, is that showing that you somehow got pictures of the woman you have a crush on is actually not cool. That is definitely a not cool thing to do. The second thing is that the 3 pictures are actually the publicity stills they took of Yeoman Rand for the show. That's what those 3 pictures are.
On Earth today, it's Thanksgiving. If the crew has to eat synthetic meatloaf, I want it to look like turkey.
Which I don't think I want my synthetic meatloaf to look like a turkey. I think that just sounds kind of gross. And then Charlie comes up, and because Janice said he should talk to Captain Kirk, and he shows what he did to her by slapping Kirk in the butt.
Yeah.
and Kirk struggling to explain why this is a problem. And the lines are terrible. I don't mean that they're bad writing. I mean that what his way of saying this is awful.
There are things you can do with a lady, Charlie, that you... well, there's no right way to hit a woman. I mean, man to man is one thing. But man and woman, it's another thing. Do you understand?
I mean, listen, Shatner's delivery in this scene is so pitch perfect because he just doesn't know what to say to this kid.
Yeah.
He left it to McCoy to be the one to handle like the fatherly advice. But now Charlie keeps going to him. Charlie looks up to Captain Kirk. And then he is saved by the bell when he is called to the bridge.
Can I come with you?
I don't think so, Charlie.
I won't get in the way.
So now this is interesting. So when Kirk gets into the turbo lift with Charlie, he's wearing the gold shirt.
Mm-hmm.
When he gets off onto the bridge, he's wearing the green shirt. Now, you could say, well, that's a big fat continuity problem. Or you could say, well, he went to his quarters to change first. So I always thought, well, yeah, he probably just went to his quarters first to freshen up and then change before he went to the bridge, and he's put on a new shirt. But in actuality, it was a continuity problem. And by the time they realized that, they were already on to the next episode, and it would have cost too much to call Robert Walker Jr. back to the set to reshoot that whole scene. So they just went with it, hoping nobody would notice, not realizing that people would be watching and dissecting these episodes hundreds and hundreds of times for 55 years. It is a mistake, but if you want to cover the mistake, you could just say, well, maybe Kirk just went to his quarters first to change, and that's why he has the green shirt. Problem solved.
We are at full output, Enterprise. I must speak to Captain Kirk.
Kirk here, Captain Robert.
Captain, we're just barely in range. I've got to warn.
They go silent. And Charlie makes a very unfortunate comment. He says, it wasn't really well constructed.
And Kirk looks around at him and he says, like, what? How the hell would you know something like that? What kind of comment is that? And they're trying to do a scan of the area. And what they are getting is debris that used to be the Antares. So clearly something happened. The Antares was destroyed. And Charlie knew that something was up before the members of the Enterprise did.
One of the things that has come up many, many times on the Cinephiles is there's an idea in filmmaking and screenwriting where you can either have the audience ahead of the characters in the movie, with the characters in the movie, or behind the characters in the movie. So if they're ahead, like let's say right now, someone has planted a bomb in my office and the clock is ticking down, and you show the audience the person planting the bomb, but I don't know anything about the bomb. There, the audience is ahead. You could have it where I open up something, and at the moment I see the bomb, the audience sees the bomb, so then we're with each other. Or you can be behind where I open something up, I see the bomb, but we haven't had my POV shot yet, so the audience doesn't know what I see. They only see my reaction to it. In this case, the audience is ahead from the beginning, because right in the teaser, we know Charlie has some powers. We with the perfume, with all these little things, we know that this guy is dangerous, but the crew of the Enterprise doesn't. And part of the dread of the show comes from the fact that we are ahead. And in fact, Hitchcock is the master of the audience being ahead. He always wants to show you everything so specifically and clearly so that you can see exactly what is going on. That's one of his geniuses. And then to cap off this scene, we get a call from the galley.
Kirk here.
Sir, I put meatloaf in the ovens. There's turkeys in there now. Real turkeys.
And you know whose voice that is, right?
That is Gene Roddenberry's only, I think, voice appearance in all of Star Trek.
That is correct. That is correct. And we have now seen a shift in tones. It's just like The Naked Time. And I know I keep going back to The Naked Time, which was the episode that we did before this. It's just like you have this tone in the first act where it's kind of playful, that he's new, like he's on this big starship, seeing all these people for the first time, seeing women for the first time, falling in love, trying to impress a girl, doing this trick. Everybody laughs. And we know that something serious is going to happen, but we don't know the extent of it yet, but we can feel it slowly building. We can feel the tone changing. We can feel it that even though we have not yet seen the full extent of his powers, even though this other starship, the Antares, just disappeared, the anticipation, wanting to know what's next, is one of the key ingredients to the success of this episode.
100% agree. And that is the end of our act. In Act 2, we start off in the rec room with back to 3D chess. And this time, again, we start off very much like Where No Man Has Gone Before, with Spock feeling pretty confident. The first thing he says,
"Your mind is not on the game, Captain."
And he puts him in check. And we also were discussing about the Antares and how the ship blew up, and why did Charlie seem to know about it in advance, and right as they're having this conversation, in comes Charlie, and Spock checks Kirk again, and then Kirk makes a move, checkmate. So once again, I think Kirk has lured Spock into making a mistake, and I love Spock's response. I love both of these lines.
Your illogical approach to chess does have its advantages on occasion, Captain.
I prefer to call it inspired.
So Charlie's standing at the door. He comes into the rec room, and he's excited because he thinks he's going to play chess with Captain Kirk, the one person on the Enterprise that he really looks up to. He's really looking up to Captain Kirk as a father figure that he never had, not even on Thesis.
I place you in the hands of our chess master.
And Charlie's disappointed that Kirk is walking out of the rec room, and Spock is like, okay, let's, the key to three-dimensional chess is this. And Charlie sits down and he's annoyed. I know how it is. Let's play. Like, his demeanor is completely changed. He is annoyed that he has to play with Spock.
And he makes his move.
That was a mistake, Charlie.
No, it wasn't.
And Spock checkmates him in 3 moves. Man, that must have been a big mistake Charlie made. And there's a great look from Spock as Charlie is getting upset and has been rude, and Spock just gets up and leaves. He doesn't want to deal with this emotional thing at all. And I'll tell you, the thought that occurred to me in this moment was, I was like, man, how did Spock's dad raise him? And I think it was very much like this. If Spock started to have an emotional thing, Dad was like, I'm out. And Sarek just left.
Interesting. I never thought about that. But yeah, good point.
Because he has no patience with this at all. And when Charlie is alone, man, we get that music cue and the eyes roll back and he melts those chess pieces.
Yeah, Charlie is pissed, and he did not hold back in those poor chess pieces. He's back in the corridors of the Enterprise, and he runs into Rand, who was with another young woman. Her name is Tina Lawton. She's a yeoman third class.
Hello, Charlie. I thought you might enjoy meeting someone your own age.
And he wants to talk to Rand.
Can I talk to you alone?
Very rude. Again, no social skills on the part of Charlie because he never had the people to show or the situations to demonstrate social skills. And Rand is mad, and he starts talking about how much he's longing for her. He thinks about her and how much he wants her. And Rand is really getting and realizing just how much he is into her. And it is more than a crush. He is like head over heels in love or lust, whatever it is. She needs help. But his performance, Robert Walker, during this delivery is fantastic. It is a great, great scene and a great delivery from him.
I totally agree. And one of the interesting things in terms of the screenwriting is, in general, humans don't actually say exactly what we're feeling. We don't come right out and just say it. Like if you have a crush on a girl, you don't go up and say, hey, I got a crush on you. That's not how we normally behave. And so in screenwriting, we tend to write in indirect speech. And what Charlie is doing, he is saying what he's thinking. His emotions are just right out there.
If I had the whole universe, I'd give it to you. I see you. I feel like I'm hungry. All over.
Wow.
And the thing, too, is that he doesn't understand that his treatment of Tina or the situation with Rand is wrong. And again, I know I've brought this up before, but I'm always interested in how the brain works. And one of the more recent, they used to believe that your brain was kind of fixed. It was what it was. And what they have determined is there's this tremendous thing, it's called neuroplasticity, where over time with knowledge, your brain grows and changes. And one of the biggest things in recent research is the frontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that does impulse control, and the logical part of your brain that can kind of step outside itself and observe the situation. In women, that only fully develops at the age of 21. And on guys, it's not till you're 25. The part of your brain that does impulse control, that can do risk assessment. And you think about, what do young guys do? Well, they're doing all that stupid stuff because the part of their brain that would regulate them, it isn't fully developed until they're 25. And I think about, you take Charlie, who in addition to being a normal 17-year-old kid, also hasn't had experience with people. Of course he doesn't know how to do this stuff. And I love too, by the way, that I love storytelling in the cut, is that the camera pushes in on her and then we cut right to the bridge and Kirk saying, he did what?
Yeah, and he's amused.
Yeah, and Charlie's a 17-year-old boy.
Exactly.
This is where I go like, it is too bad that we didn't have more Yeoman Rand, because her line...
Captain, I've seen the look before. And if something isn't done, sooner or later I'm going to have to hurt him.
That's a very sophisticated human who's really understands this situation and thinking about what to do about it. Like, that's a smart character. The other thing, by the way, I know you've mentioned the cinematography many times. The lighting in this episode is so interesting because the lighting is not realistic. It is like like the way you normally do cinematography. The basic rule is you look for what would really be the light source. So I'm in my room and I have a window there and I have a window there. And so you place lights to match what the actual light source would be. And then you hold to that. That is not what's happening on the Enterprise at all.
That is why, Steve, that Jerry Finnerman deserves so much credit, so many accolades, and so much praise for the look, the unique, the distinct, the beautiful, artistic flair that he brought to Star Trek, especially in those first two seasons, and especially in the first half of the first season when they were still figuring everything out, trying different things. There is a lot about this episode in particular where the lighting is so dramatic. And is it realistic? No, it's not realistic.
No.
But it's art. It is art, and this is a painting. The way that that Finnerman would use these gels, the color gels, to light the scenes and light the walls and light the bulkheads and establish mood. He establishes mood with this lighting, and he really treats the scenes like art, like paintings. And I think that's why there is no other series that looks like Star Trek, neither before or after that series. Star Trek has a look unto itself, and that is because of Finnerman.
Well, and if you think about imagined scenes in Next Generation, that lighting, everything is even. It's all general lighting.
Yeah,
and this is there's shadows and highlights, particularly how he's lighting Yeoman Rand's eyes, is that there's like shadow on her forehead. There's shadow that's flagged off on the bottom of her face, and just a wedge of light right at the eyes. It's really interesting.
And Kirk has accepted the fact that he has to have a heart-to-heart with the guy.
Yeah.
And he has to do what McCoy asked him to do all along, which is be the father figure.
I'm his first crush, his first love, and his first...
Yes, Yeoman, I'll talk to him. I'll look into it.
So now it's time for the heart-to-heart, the man-to-man talk between Kirk and Charlie. As fate would have it, Kirk was not the one who was going to give this heart-to-heart to Charlie. In Fontana's earlier version, it was Dr. McCoy who has the heart-to-heart with Charlie. And that would actually fit quite nicely with the scene that they had in the beginning of the first act in the sickbay. But it was Roddenberry who said, no, let's make Kirk have the man-to-man talk. And it should be the captain. I mean, it's Captain Enterprise, it's a show. But the chemistry between William Shatner and Robert Walker in the scene is so great. The performances are great.
There's so many great moments in this scene. And first of all, just Kirk's awkwardness and then warming up to the task.
And Shatner, the way he tries to, walk on eggshells a little bit with him and try to be nice with him.
The moment where Charlie says,
everything I do or say is wrong. I'm in the way. I don't know the rules. And when I learn something and try to do it, suddenly I'm wrong. I don't know what I am or what I'm supposed to be or even who.
I swear to God, my kid has said those exact words. It's just like right out of things that are going on in parenting.
There's nothing wrong with you that hasn't gone wrong with every other human male since the model first came out.
What if you care for someone? What do you do?
You go slow.
It's such a beautifully staged scene in that you just see how much Charlie is hurting, how lonely he is. He's lonely. Even though he's now on a starship with all these people, he doesn't have people skills. He doesn't have social skills. He doesn't know how to interact. He's in love for the first time. He's very, very confused with his feelings. And he has these powers that he cannot control. And he wants people to like him. He thinks that nobody likes him. He's alone. It is a different form of loneliness than we've seen so far in the series. Very different from the loneliness that Kirk experiences as the burden of command in The Naked Time. Very different from the loneliness that we see Professor Crater deal with in The Man Trap. It is a different form of loneliness because no one can relate to Charlie, and we still don't even know why no one can relate to Charlie.
Then there's this other moment that I never had this thought before until watching it this time.
She could love me.
She's not the girl, Charlie. The years are wrong, for one thing.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And then he says,
and there are other things.
Oh.
And I suddenly went, what are the other things? And I, for the first time ever, went, Kirk is talking about his feelings for Rand. Is that they have this unspoken or kind of spoken between Enemy Within and Naked Time that we know Kirk has feelings for Rand. And so that line suddenly jumped out at me and it never had before.
That's interesting. I never thought about that, but I think you're right. When he says, and there are other things, like saying, hands off, buddy. She's not only because she's my yeoman, but I have feelings for her. He doesn't elaborate. I never thought about that. But I want to ask you. You brought up now a couple of times, Steve, how watching this episode now is making you think about your own relationship with your son, the experiences that he is having as he's growing up. So I want to ask you, has he ever seen this episode with you?
No, I thought about showing it to him. And I talked to him about that episode today, literally an hour and a half ago. He and I were going out on a walk to get some exercise, and I was telling him about it. And I said to him, can you imagine, because he gets angry. He has some he has trouble maintaining his equilibrium sometimes. Mm-hmm, and I said, could you imagine if you had godlike powers and when you were really angry? And he said, and then this is this is the conversation we just had. So I'm glad you asked me. He said, well, if I had those powers, I would make something so that I could turn my anger down, and I would give it to you so that when I started to get really angry, you could just help me turn my anger down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I strongly advise, especially after we were done with this episode, whether it's today or this week or some point, because you just had the conversation with him, you should sit down and watch it with him and be like, have a discussion with him after the fact. Because you know what? I will bet you that this episode will resonate even more after you've watched it with your son.
I'm thinking about it. He sometimes has nightmares. And there's the image that we're going to get to that freaked me out.
Still.
Yeah. And so I worry that's going to freak him out. By the way, one totally small thing, the line that Shatner delivers beautifully.
Charlie, there are a million things in this universe you can have, and there are a million things you can't have.
That ratio is totally wrong. There's like a billion things you can't have, and maybe a few hundred things you can have. Most of the universe is stuff you can't have.
That's true. That is absolutely true. But listen, at this point, I mean, Kirk is really talking to Charlie for the first time.
Yeah.
Like this is the ultimate heart to heart, man to man. And Kirk really empathizes with Charlie. So he has an idea. So let's blow off some steam. Let's head down to the Enterprise gymnasium. And this is the one and only time that we see the gymnasium of the Enterprise.
And because anytime we have manly problems, we need to be manly men and go do some manly things. And Kirk demonstrates how to fall, which he does. So I teach Aikido. So I've done martial arts for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so Aikido is a martial art where you fall a lot. So I've taught a lot of people how to fall. He shouldn't be falling straight back like that. That could hurt your coccyx. And then, but he does slap the mat, which is correct, to absorb the energy. And then he tells Charlie to take a fall with giving him no instruction whatsoever. like just do it. Just do a shoulder roll. That's not actually that easy. So it's just because I taught a lot of people how to fall. It's really hard, particularly for adults to learn.
Well, listen, nobody falls and does a shoulder roll like Shatner. And by the way, so this scene we see in the episode that Kirk is not wearing a top. He's shirtless. So
shocking.
Hang on. Here's the interesting thing. When they were filming this scene, Shatner did not want to be shirtless. He wanted to wear a red robe, like one of the other crew members is wearing, the one that he makes disappear. He's wearing like this red robe. There's actually some publicity stills where Shatner is wearing that red robe over his red tights. And he did not want to be topless because, this is now the sixth episode that they've aired or that they have shot in production order when Star Trek went to series, starting with the Corbomite maneuver. So at this point, because of the demands of filming a weekly TV series, especially the demands of a science fiction series that no one has ever done before, with production values that no one has ever done before, and plus the demands of being a lead actor. So Shatner had put on a little bit of weight, and he was really self-conscious about it, and he just wanted to wear a shirt. And so the director, Lawrence Dobkin, said, okay, well, let's shoot it both ways. They shot it both ways. They used the one without the shirt. But anyway.
I'm trying to think, is that this is at least the third time he's been shirtless since we began. because he's shirtless in the Corbomite at the beginning of the doctor's exam. He's shirtless in Enemy Within. When they cut to him in the room, when Spock comes in to talk to him. Right. I don't know if he's shirtless anywhere else. It's like, yeah, they've been asking him to take that shirt off a lot.
Well, at the end of Where No Man Has Gone Before, his shirt was ripped pretty good, but he was still wearing it.
All right, Charlie, lesson's over for today.
You were going to teach me how to fight.
You have to learn to protect yourself in the fall before I do that.
Which is 100% correct in the martial arts that I've done. And he just goes, I don't want to do that. And Kirk calls his buddy Sam over to do a couple throws. Sam throws Kirk. Kirk throws Sam. And then it's time to do it with Charlie. And they have a little moment. And this is just completely unfair. Kirk's way bigger than Charlie, and he just takes him down.
And this other guy, Sam, starts laughing. And if there's one thing that we know about Charlie is that he wants to be liked. And if there's something else that we are now going to learn about him, something that will stay with us through the end of this episode, is that you do not laugh at Charlie.
Don't laugh at me!
And Kirk, for the first time, sees just a taste of the extent of Charlie's powers with his own eyes, and he is shocked and horrified, cannot believe what he just saw. He made his crew member, Sam, just disappear.
It's a truly scary moment. Shatner plays it great.
It's not nice to laugh at people.
What happened to him, Charlie?
He's gone.
That's no answer.
He's gone. I didn't mean to do that. He made me do it.
And that is just classic, I am not responsible for this actions, that this is what kids do.
Right.
And Kirk calmly calls the bridge, calls for two guys from security. Charlie asks, what are you going to do to me? Again, the lighting is extreme, similar to what we saw in Yeoman Rand.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Shatner moves into the scene, and the lighting on his eyes, and then the lighting on Robert Walker's eyes, like his eyes are shining.
I won't let them hurt me. I'll make them go away, too.
They won't hurt you, Charlie.
And the security comes in. He tells them to take Charlie to his quarters, and they walk towards him, and he knocks them both down. And a guy draws a phaser, and Charlie says no, and the phaser disappears. Watch Bill Shatner in this sequence. The intensity of his look at Charlie, of the eye contact, he just knows that he has to psychologically dominate this person in this moment.
Go to your quarters.
He was going to hurt me.
Go to your quarters, or I'll pick you up and carry you there.
He has to be the one to show that he is in control, that he has to present himself in a way that Charlie will listen to him, that he still has control over the situation. The look that Charlie gives back is like, almost like, I dare you. It's a great way to end the act.
It's such a great moment. And the note that I wrote down here was, I wrote, Kirk is best when he's outmatched. When you're facing the Viserys, or when you're facing Gary Mitchell, or when you're facing Charlie, or in The Naked Time where he's, basically is drugged, like that's where Kirk's at his best. And it's also why Mudd's Women is such a weak episode, because he's not outmatched. Hardcore Fenton Mudd is an interesting character, but he's not a match for James T. Kirk.
Right.
The other thing, and again, I'm just continuing to think about, because this episode made me thinking about childhood and development. And one of the keys to development is we're trained with positive and negative consequences, just like an animal is, there's the carrot and the stick. And that what I suddenly went is like, oh, Charlie has had no positive and negative consequences, because he's gotten whatever he wanted because he has these powers, and he's not being punished, but his life is really sad. And so he hasn't learned how to deal with negative things in his life because he's had no reason to.
Mm-hmm.
How do you learn self-control when you can create anything you want? No reason to have self-control. Act 3, we come back right to where we left off, and Kirk just dominates them. And Charlie goes out with the 2 security guards. And I love Shatner's moment right after, because you can see once Charlie's gone, that was rough. You know, that took a lot out of it.
Kirk here.
Security reports that all phaser weapons have disappeared.
And it is time for Kirk, Spock, and McCoy to have a little powwow here, because they are in serious trouble. And now Kirk has seen with his own eyes what happened in the gymnasium. So they're in the briefing room and they're talking about the Phasians, again, the race that it may or may not even exist. And Kirk still can't believe what he saw in the gymnasium, but he did see it, and they have to deal with the situation.
Short-tempered, because he doesn't understand. He wants. Nothing happens fast enough.
The probability is he's responsible for the destruction of the Antares, which would indicate a total disregard for human life.
He doesn't understand what life is. He's a boy.
And Charlie walks into the briefing room, and Kirk asks him flat out,
You're responsible for what happened to the Antares, Charlie.
Yes? There was a warped baffle plate on the shield of their energy pile. I made it go away. Well, they weren't nice to me.
like that's all it takes? You're going to wipe out 20 human beings because they're not nice to you? And this is an out of control adolescent. These godlike powers in the hands of an adolescent. That's really, really bad, which is something that Spock later points out.
In the hands of an adolescent.
What was interesting to me is this is one of the few scenes like this where Spock and McCoy are in total agreement. They are not arguing about this point. They are 100% on the same page.
Yeah.
We go back to the bridge because one of the things that we've decided is we can't go towards Colony 5. That's where we're going to drop Charlie off, but we don't know what he would do. He would run rampant. And as they start to do this, Uhura's working at her board and it suddenly shorts out in a big rain of sparks, and she goes down. And now the helm says it's not responding to course changes. And we see Charlie walk in the background, and Kirk turns to ask Spock a question. And Spock says,
"Yes, sir. There's a tiger burning bright in the forest of the night."
He's quoting from the Tiger by William Blake. And it's disturbing to see Charlie torturing Spock. Yeah. Spock, who is always talk about control. You're talking about a character that is in control, fighting to be in control every step of the way to keep his emotions in check and stay true to his Vulcan side. And now this out of control adolescent is using his powers to control Spock. And it's disturbing. And the force in which Nimoy has to say the line is powerful. It's disturbing to see Spock tortured like this emotionally.
Nimoy plays it great, and I totally agree. It's really upsetting.
You're trying to change course, Captain. You can't do that. I want to get to Colony 5 as soon as we can.
And he's having fun with it, too. Like he makes Spock quote the Raven.
"Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary."
Very nice, Mr. Ears.
I mean, he's just having fun. Charlie is now unleashed pretty much. And Kirk says, "Leave my crew alone." And Charlie just walks out.
Jim, he'll soon reach a point where he won't back down.
I know.
And then Charlie is in the hallway, sees Tina, turns her into an iguana.
He doesn't even care about trying to control himself. The cat is out of the bag with his powers, all the way to the top, because the captain has, and everyone under him at this point, has seen the extent to which Charlie can wreak havoc on the Enterprise, which he is now doing. And this is where the tone of the episode shifts into something different, something much more drastic, much bigger stakes. And the Enterprise becomes like a hell ship to an extent, because who knows what this kid's going to do. And we're trapped on the Enterprise with him.
And then we end up in Rand's quarters, which, by the way, it seems like the Enterprise, none of these doors lock. Everyone can just walk in wherever they want to go.
Yeah, good point.
Rand is in pink. She's in what looks like a nightgown. The thought that occurred to me watching it this time was just a few episodes ago, Dark James T. Kirk attempted to rape her in this room. And now Charlie X is in this room, and he is even more dangerous than Kirk. And he pulls out a pink rose to give to her, which, by the way, it looks like the exact same pink as her outfit, that they color matched it because Charlie knows that's her favorite color. And now we see a very different Rand. She is really strong in this scene because she's realized like that she was trying to be nice up to this point. And she said, there's going to come a time where I'm going to have to hurt him. And that's where we are.
Right. Yeah. The time is now, because obviously whatever heart to heart Charlie had with Captain Kirk didn't work, because he is coming on real strong now in her quarters.
You don't walk into a room without knocking.
Don't ever lock your door on me again, Janice. I love you.
And she is at that point where she's going to put her foot down and say,
I'll lock it when I please. What is it you want, anyway?
And he says,
you.
And he walks towards her, and the music stings on the scene, and we come to the end of Act 3.
It is genuinely a scary ending to the act.
Yes.
And we come right back into the room at the beginning of Act 4, just where we left off. And we see Janice talking to him. But while she's doing that, she has reached down and has pushed a button. And up on the bridge, we can now hear their voices coming through. And Kirk and Spock are listening.
Get out, Charlie.
Spock.
I can't make it any plainer than that.
And they run down to her quarters. And with just the shrug of his shoulder, Kirk and Spock go flying back towards the bulkhead. Rand is horrified, and she slaps Charlie. And he, without any thought at all, without giving it any thought, without any control, just reacts in a way that he uses his power to make Rand completely disappear. And when she does disappear, he realizes what he did, but it's too late.
It's so interesting, the connection between love and anger, or desire and need and rage within Charlie. He doesn't know how to get what he needs. He doesn't understand. And when he doesn't get it, he gets angry.
I loved her, but she wasn't nice at all. What you did wasn't nice either. But I still need you, Captain.
Apparently, the Enterprise is just a little too complicated for him to do all by himself, which, by the way, is an important clue that I think Kirk picks up on for later on in the episode.
You have to be nice.
And then he basically tortures Kirk. Then lifts it up. Kirk gets to his feet and gestures to Spock. And he can't get up because his legs are broken. And I love this moment. Again, Kirk has to dominate. He has zero power. He has no way to affect Charlie at all. He's completely outmatched, and he says,
Let him go too, Charlie.
Why?
Because I'm telling you to. Because you need me to run the ship, and I need him.
You know, at this point, everything up to this point is Kirk is really, even after he demonstrated his power and he became more forceful with Charlie, he was still in control. She knew that Charlie was listening to him, but now he isn't. I mean, he let Spock get up, but it is the breaking point now. And Kirk is just at the point where he realizes that he can't really treat Charlie with kid gloves anymore. Not that he is, because he's definitely been more forceful, but he's I would say a wolf in sheep's clothing in the extent that he looks like this harmless little kid, but he's just got these powers. And Kirk is slowly getting to the point throughout the episode where he just has to treat him with just so much force, even when it becomes physical.
The last moment is such an interesting line, because Charlie starts to leave and then turns back and says,
Growing up isn't so much. I'm not a man and I can do anything. You can't.
That is a lot of a line. And of course, the reality is he can't do anything because he can't understand the society that he's in. He can't get Yeoman Rand to love him. He can't get Kirk to really like him, or the rest of the crew to like him. If this is a movie about all the things Charlie can't have. There's another moment in the scene too that I wanted to bring up, which is that Charlie says to Rand, I love you. And she says, you don't know what that word means.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, because again, I was thinking about this episode in a really different way and thinking about who Charlie is and what his past is. And I went, oh, that is literally true. When we hear what life was like with the Thasians, Charlie has never been given love. He's never seen love. He literally doesn't know what love is. And I suddenly went, oh, you could look at this story as Charlie is the victim of abuse, that he is a child who has been abused because he is, even though he's been given godlike powers, he's also been raised in a completely loveless atmosphere. And it made me think of this very famous study where a guy named Harry Harlow took rhesus monkeys. And because there's all this sort of nature versus nurture ideas within psychology, and why and he said, no, nurture's got to be a part of this. And so he took these monkeys and took them away from their moms and raised them in total isolation to see what they did. And he did other things where he raised them with a wire shape of a mom that gave them milk, or a soft shape of a mom, but didn't have the actual mom there. And these monkeys that were raised in isolation became violent. They harmed themselves. When they were reintroduced into society, they didn't know how to behave. They often attacked the other animals, and sometimes they just would starve to death because they couldn't exist within the other rhesus monkeys because they had been raised in isolation and without love. And I just was thinking about that, and I went, that's Charlie X. That's who he is. And what was really interesting, so then I had to look up the study. The scientist's name is Harry Harlow. The study was published in 1965.
The year before the episode was filmed.
Yep.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. You know, I keep thinking now just how in the various episodes we've done so far, just in conversation that we have, that I think about things in a different way. For example, when Kirk is having the heart-to-heart with Charlie, and so there's her age is one thing, and there are other things. It never occurred to me that it was because of the connection and the feelings, the unspoken feelings that Kirk and Rand have for each other. So that's
isn't it amazing, Scott, that you and I mean, you obviously, you are a well-known Star Trek expert, and I have watched these things and read the books and like over and over and over again. And we're both having this experience of going, I'm seeing new things. I'm learning new things from you. I'm thinking about these shows that are 55 years old in a completely new way. And it's A, so much fun, and B, it's just blowing my mind about
Absolutely.
how much these shows have to say, you know?
My mind is blown now because of those sort of new ways that I've thought about this particular episode. And Charlie not only is getting to a point where Kirk cannot control him, but we see that Charlie is becoming more confident. Mm-hmm. And we are at another scene where Kirk and Spock try to lure him into the brig. And Charlie walks in and says, aren't you guys coming in? And Kirk motions with his head, no, we're not. And Spock activates the brig, and Charlie walks towards the force field. He is thrown back, and he uses his power to make the entire brig, including the bulkheads, completely disappear. So we're seeing the wiring and the pipes and the inner workings of the Enterprise. And so he makes Kirk and Spock freeze up, and we are seeing that there is really no limit to Charlie's powers, and also no ceiling on him controlling his powers.
I absolutely love that he makes that whole bulkhead disappear. I think it is such a great choice. And it's so funny because we just had another super powered godlike person to deactivate a force field with Gary Mitchell. And this one is so much more exciting with that wall going away. It's amazing. And of course, the last thing Charlie says is,
that wasn't nice. You'll be sorry.
What scary words to hear from Charlie X.
I'm glad you brought up Gary Mitchell. So here we are, we're into basically, if you include the cage, we're into the 8th episode of Star Trek Produced. And in Where No Man Has Gone Before, we see Gary Mitchell, he gets godlike powers, and he lacks the wisdom to use his powers. And what does Charlie lack? He also lacks the wisdom to use his powers. And just like Kirk said in Where No Man Has Gone Before, He says to Dana while he's being controlled by Mitchell, do you like what you see? Absolute power corrupting absolutely. And Kirk is seeing that absolute power being corrupted absolutely again, that these no mortal, no human should have these powers because they will never have the wisdom to control it and use it wisely.
It's so crazy that this connection between all these episodes that occurred to me when we were doing Mantrap. You know, we have the Telosians who had this credible illusion power. It destroyed their civilization. They offer it to Captain Pike, and he could have all the things he wants, and he has to use his mind and reject it. We have Kirk's brain having to overcome his everything that happens to him in the naked time. We have Kirk splitting in two and needing his wisdom and knowledge to be what unifies him back in. And now we have an adolescent who hasn't developed the ability to deal with these powers. And man, we are going to see, because we've reached the sequence that freaked me out, is that Charlie, rampages through the corridor. First, he turns a young woman into an old woman. And then we see shadows of someone laughing around the corner, a group of people laughing.
We see the shadows on the bulkhead of the crew members. We don't actually see anybody.
No laughing!
There's a huge music sting.
We see the shadows freeze, but then we hear a muffled sound of a woman trying to speak, but she can't open her mouth. And we see a woman crew member, a female crew member, holding on to the bulkhead to feel her way around. And the reason she can't speak is because she doesn't have a face. He made her face disappear. Talk about torture. And the way the director shot it, he shot just enough. You just barely get a glimpse of her face before it is cut to the next scene of the Enterprise in space. But I remember when I first got this on video back in the 80s, one of the first things that I did with Charlie X was when I got to that scene, I froze it because I'd never seen, this is way before the internet. They didn't have this image on any trading cards. Yeah. And I wanted to see, and I just was like, I was like, wow, that is just so amazing and so scary. Just when we think we've seen Charlie do it all and, he does something with his powers that is truly shocking. We've seen it all. He makes a crew member's face completely disappear, but he doesn't kill the person. That
was actually my next question, because in my mind, I always was like, oh, she can't speak, because he wanted to stop her laughing. But then as I got older, I went, wait, can she breathe?
Right. So that's torture. So she doesn't have a face. She doesn't have a mouth or a nose to breathe. So she's going to suffocate painfully.
Within minutes.
With no remorse. Charlie just doesn't know what empathy feels like. He doesn't know what remorse feels like. And that's part of the problem. He's already a 17-year-old young man, and he just lacks the wisdom to even empathize with the pain that he is inflicting on his fellow, humans, but also anyone who's on the Enterprise, the people that he's already killed on the Antares.
I've waited long enough. I'm going to take him on.
You don't have any special immunity? Not anymore? Push far enough, he'd send you off to oblivion, too.
Kirk reasons that if he can take him on in such a way that there's so much going on the Enterprise, Charlie can't control everything at once. He'll get overwhelmed. And when he lets down his guard, that's when I'll take control of the situation. I'm paraphrasing. Charlie comes on the Enterprise bridge and he says, I can do anything I want. And he sits in the captain's chair.
Get out of my chair, Charlie, and get out of it now.
I've got your ship, Captain.
This is just the great delivery of Shatner as Kirk.
Maybe, Charlie, but I don't think you can handle anymore.
And he motions for Uhura and Spock and McCoy to turn on all the systems on the bridge. And Charlie is getting scared and overwhelmed.
I could have sent you away before, but I didn't.
You're going to have to take me out.
Don't make me do it now.
Kirk's ability to dominate, his ability he's got nothing. I mean, it's like the Corbomite maneuver. He's literally completely outmatched. And yet the strength of will of Captain Kirk is just massive, because this is the guy that was able to unify himself with the enemy within. This is the guy that is the only person, along with Spock, I guess, who could overcome whatever happened to him in the Naked Time. This is a guy who is not going to quit.
And Kirk says,
"You've got my ship and I want it back. I want my crew back, whole. I have to break your neck to do it."
And he throws Charlie out of the captain's chair. You know, Charlie replies with this motion of inflicting pain on Kirk, and he's saying, "I'm sorry." He's saying, "I'm sorry," because he likes Captain Kirk, even through all this.
And I love, too, after he pulls him out of the chair, they end up on the ground. We have a shot that I think is unlike any shot in Star Trek, which is the camera's down on the ground level with Kirk in the foreground and Charlie in the background. It's a completely unique angle. Then we hear these weird sounds. Because before we heard that there might be a ship or something going on, and they said, well, are you creating that? Or to Charlie, are you creating that? Or are you blocking us from hearing it? And now the signals are suddenly coming through because Charlie was overwhelmed. As soon as we hear that these are the Thasians, his whole attitude changes. Everything about what's going on. He is genuinely terrified.
And it is a blood-curdling scream, no! The Thasian ship is on the view screen of the Enterprise. And then we see the Thasian leader, played by Abraham Safar.
"We did not realize until too late that the boy had gone, and we are saddened that his escape cost the lives of the first ships. We could not help them. But we have returned your people and your ship to you."
And Charlie is terrified. Charlie, and this is where Robert Walker's performance, again, is just so right on, and so perfect, and so strong and powerful.
Oh, I won't do it again. Please, I'll be good. I won't ever do it again. I'm sorry about the Antares. I'm sorry! I want to go with you. Help me.
There, you can see the moment where things start to change. You can see looks from Uhura, from Rand, and of course from Kirk towards Charlie. And then suddenly, this is the monster. I mean, this is a scary, scary person. And yet you can see how compassionate they feel for this boy who is afraid and is going to go back to a loveless place. Again, I see Charlie as the victim of child abuse, you know, who's now being sent back to his abusers. And the amazing thing is that you see that change happen on Kirk's face, and you see him stand up into frame and says,
"The boy belongs with his own kind.
That will be impossible.
With training, we can teach him to live in our society, if he can be taught not to use his power."
And to me, I go, this is Kirk from the Corbomite maneuver, who after the Fesarius is disabled says, we have to go help them out. Even though they've been trying to destroy us this whole time, we need to go help them out. And that's what he's saying with Charlie X right in this moment.
We gave him the power so he could live. He will use it, always. And he would destroy you and your kind, or you would be forced to destroy him to save yourselves.
The score by Fred Steiner, this moody, ominous, dark score that we hear later in the third season on the Tholian web when they're on the Defiant.
Oh, please. Don't let them take me.
The moment where Charlie says,
I can't even touch them.
And you see Yeoman Rand actually starts to go to him, like to embrace him, because, and that, again, that's an amazing thing of compassion. I mean, the guy literally just killed her on some level and was basically really, really scary. And yet she still feels compassion for this young boy. I mean, his final lament.
I can't feel. Not like you. They don't love.
And then this sound haunts me. The please, I want to stay, and the echoes.
I want to stay, 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 stay.
Yeah. And he freezes up and he turns the color of the Thasians, and then he disappears. And that echo of the stay, what a great effect, what a great impact that it ends on such a tragic and chilling and haunting note, that stay. Yeah. I mean, it's so powerful and it's so sad. And Rand starts to cry, and
it's all right, human. It's all over now.
What a sad episode.
I'm racking my brain. Like, of course, I haven't watched every drama from the mid 60s, but this is such a complicated emotional experience, Charlie X. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And your feelings at the end of it are so complicated. And one other thing I just wanted to touch on is that this is now the second version of the Uber powered person. So we had Gary Mitchell. Mm-hmm. We have the Thasians and Charlie X, and we're going to get a whole bunch more. We're going to have the Metrons. We're going to have Trelane and the Squire of Gothos. We're going to have Errand of Mercy and the Organians. We're going to have Return to Tomorrow. And it's like, there are all these characters in the Star Trek universe that have this massive, massive amount of power. And of course, the one that I think it all leads to is Q.
But hang on, but there's a difference. These other aliens that you just mentioned are just that, aliens. The Metrons, Trelane. Mm-hmm. We don't even know where Trelane's from, but probably he's from the same area as Q. I mean, I don't know. There was a book about it. But when you're putting that kind of power in a mortal human being, the power is too great for them. You know, and the kid, look at what happened with Gary Mitchell. Look what happened with Charles Evans is his name, Charles Evans.
And look what's going to happen in Return to Tomorrow. There's problems being back in the human body.
Right. You know? Well, absolutely. But you know, when Return to Tomorrow, you know, Sargon and you know that like those they were a much more evolved. Like they used to be human, but they were so far evolved that they didn't need bodies anymore. But they dared to think of themselves as gods. But in the terms of having that power in a present day human, it's too much. And we've now seen that twice, that when you put that kind of power in a human, that power corrupts. It corrupted Gary Mitchell. It corrupted Charlie Evans. You know, the difference with Gary Mitchell was that up to a certain point, he lived a life. He did have social skills. He had experiences. He had an upbringing. Charlie needed these powers to take care of himself, but he was still a human being. And it was the adolescent side of him that kept him from having the wisdom to use his powers in the right way. And it cost him.
Yeah. So do you have reactions to this show? Like what's sort of the word about it?
Well, the word is that when it was over, I just shook my head again and went, wow, that episode really holds up. It is, you know, just like every episode that we've talked about so far, watching it so in depth and, you know, with a different set of eyes, because knowing that we were going to just do such a deep dive into it, it's an episode that I definitely appreciate more now, but it is an episode that I've always really, really liked. And I think the performances are fantastic. The message, obviously, that absolute power corrupts, but also the relatability of being an adolescent. And also, you know, this episode came out in 1966. And I think that it spoke to the youth of the late 60s, the counterculture, the changing of the guard and you know, belonging and all these people who were so different. I think it resonated on that level too with people in the 60s who were watching it when it aired for the first time. And it is a superb episode. And Dorothy Fontana, who wrote it, said, I always liked that show. It felt really good for my first Star Trek. Lawrence Dobkin, who directed the episode, said, probably my best memory of Star Trek is all those people. My God, what a talented bunch. William Shatner's ability to envision shots was evident, even though he hadn't started directing yet. And Grace Lee Whitney, who did great work with Robert Walker Jr. in that episode, said Robert Walker was a stroke of casting luck for Star Trek. He captured the perfect balance, projecting vulnerability, innocence, and horrifying menace all at the same time. And Grace Lee Whitney, we could not have said it better ourselves.
I think Robert Walker is amazing in this. I think he creates something so totally unique. And here's the epiphany I just had, is that I was trying to think, like, it's such an odd experience to have this extremely sympathetic but really scary villain who in the end is a tragic figure. And that's a very, very complicated kind of character to create. I was trying to go, where else is there a character like this? And I went back to the very first science fiction story ever told, and that is Frankenstein. Frankenstein is a character that is once scary and sympathetic and tragic. Charlie X puts me on this emotional ride that is unlike anything else, I think, in all of Star Trek. And that it's so funny because it's an episode that I don't seek out that much, not because I think it's bad, like, you know, The Children Shall Lead or some of those other ones that are not good Star Trek. I think it's really, really good, but it hurts me. It really does. His struggles, his anger, his pain, how lost he is, how damn scary the guy is, and then that tragic end, that scream, I want to stay, that it's still echoing in my brain right now, because what I picture is decades, maybe centuries, maybe millennia, where Charlie Evans is trapped in a world entirely without love. He has the powers of a god, but the experience of a prison. That is what upsets me so much.
For the short time that he was with his own people, for the time that he was on the Antares, for the time that he was on the Enterprise, and experiencing, I don't know if love is the word, I would call it lust.
Sure.
He was definitely, I think it was more of a lust factor in his attraction to Rand than a love one. And now to just dip his toe in humanity and to experience it the way he did for such a short period of time, and to now know that he's never going to have it again, that he had his time and it was taken from him, and he will spend the rest of his life, the rest of who knows how long the Thasians live, for his days that he will spend without love, without warmth, compassion, emotion. That is tragic. That's the tragedy of it all, is that he will never be able to experience what he experienced and squandered. He squandered his opportunity. He squandered his life. And it is really sad.
So that is what we think of Charlie X. Of course, we want to hear what you think, so you can follow the show by visiting us on Facebook. Just do a search for Enterprise Incidents. You can follow us on Twitter at Enter Incidents, on Instagram at Enterprise Incidents, and you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, on Stitcher, Anchor, a whole bunch of other places. Please, please leave your reviews on Apple Podcasts. They are the most important thing for people to find out about the show. Scott and I are really proud of it, and we want to share it with as many people as possible. And of course, you can leave your comments on YouTube, which we love interacting with. Scott, how would people reach you?
Okay, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and at Movie Mance. Okay, so it's at Movie Mance with a TZ. And I really would love to hear from you about Enterprise Incidents. And I would love to hear from you about this episode of Enterprise Incidents. Give us your take on Charlie X. What did you think of the episode? What did you think of our deep dive analysis of the episode? So make sure you hit me up on Twitter at Movie Mance, and you hit Steve up at
SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And if you're interested in movies, we'll check out the Cinephiles, where we've done deep dives into incredible filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, where we've explored The Shining, we've explored Dr. Strangelove, and of course, one of my favorite episodes, 2001, with one of my favorite guests, Scott Mance. So do a search for the Cinephiles podcast. But Scott, where are we going next on Enterprise Incidents?
Oh boy, Steve, this is a doozy. This is a doozy. You know, we have gotten to talk about some pretty great episodes so far on Enterprise Incidents. Such great conversations on Where No Man Has Gone Before, on The Enemy Within, which was an epic conversation. Great conversations on just top-notch episodes like The Naked Time, and even just this one with Charlie X. But the next one is in the annals of Star Trek. I got to say, this next episode isn't just one of the very best episodes of the original series. It's one of the greatest Star Trek episodes ever made. That episode is Balance of Terror. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about with Balance of Terror. An absolutely seminal episode, one of my top 5 favorite Star Trek episodes of them all. An absolute masterpiece, a brilliant episode, a classic, an epic episode. And for sure, it is going to be an epic conversation about Balance of Terror. So join us for our deep dive into Balance of Terror on the next episode of Enterprise Incidents. And until then, keep going boldly.